Our first speaker for this morning. There's not much one can say about John Buddie that isn't known. He's been in the game, well, I should say to a degree. Johnny has been in Collie for over 27 years. He started off as a junior handler, as many of us know, when he just came on the scene. And everybody said, as I think it was George did it beautifully yesterday, who is that little fellow? Who is that fellow? Who is that SOB who's always winning? Johnny has had a wonderful record when it comes to showing, as we all know. For example, he won Best of Breed. I think it was probably the first time in our history. No, there was one other dog I know did. But he won it 3 years in a row with the well-known Gladiator. In 1973, 74, 75, he won the CC of A. And he skipped a few years. In 1985, he won it with, apparently, he was the Breed of the Year in 1973. And he won the Collie Review Award as the individual who done the most for the breed, as voted on by review subscribers, in 1987. Now let me digress a moment when I say Breeder of the Year is one thing, but the one who has done the most for the breed is entirely another. But this is what it's all about for people like ourselves who've been in the game for 20, 30 years, giving back to the breed. And only I know how much John has done in the last few years, not only in the writing of the articles, which are always amazing to me, how many he writes at one time for the magazine, but what he does around the country. I wonder how many of you know how many symposiums we have where it is, for example, for lack of a word, John Buddie Presents, where he does a lecture the whole day for individuals all over the country, for groups rather, and then follows it the next day giving his expertise in judging a puppy match, whereas we all know is without the beginning of searching for the elusive perfect collie. And he's been doing this for years. And if anybody has got to give back to the game, John has certainly done his share in, quote, paying his dues. And I think we are all terribly appreciative of it. So without any further ado, where are you, John Buddie?
Topic this morning is the stud dog. In any discussion of the stud dog, it can be approached from a lot of different angles. It can be discussed for days, weeks, months, and still you're not going to come up with all of the answers. In choosing the topic, I was trying to narrow it down to one specific aspect that I wanted to speak on, but I've decided to touch on several different areas. Here's the definition of what a stud dog is. There's the answering the question, why should you keep a stud dog? There are thoughts on training a stud dog. There are thoughts on maintenance and care of a stud dog, promotion of a stud dog, and problems of a stud dog. The last one probably the longest of all. Any dog possessing 2 testicles and live sperm and a penis could be considered a stud dog. And there's lots of them around the country. The definition of a stud dog is as easy to define as a show prospect puppy. We could go on and on and on trying to define that one. The case of semantics will always come into play, and it really depends on who's involved in the discussion as to just what constitutes a good stud dog. Opinions will vary. People who have bred dogs successfully for a number of years become successful for a number of reasons. And let me digress here for a minute regarding success. For that, too, is another word which can play the semantics game. What is success? Is it winning? Creating a line? Finishing a lot of champions? Becoming a collie judge? And then a collie and Sheltie judge? And then an all-breed judge? It's an individual thing. And the longer I'm in dogs, the one thing I've come to know and it's been said by the other speakers yesterday, a lot of this comes into what works for you. And it's pretty much the same with a stud dog. I believe in days gone by, the days of the big breeder and the great kennels, that success for them was a combination of winning and creating a line. One always conditional upon the other. It wasn't always a matter of creating the best show records, but creating a family of dogs excelling in the virtues necessary to win, but at the same time establishing a family of virtues in which all the individuals within the line would share the same virtues and could be depended upon to produce in the same manner. If they were lucky, some of those individuals were extremely prepotent and could be counted upon to continually produce the same qualities which they deemed important in their particular family. They became the earmark of each of the great kennels. This is not to say that all of their stud dogs produced alike, but rather they all produced the family virtues, but each one adding a different characteristic that might be new or important to that particular family. But those important virtues, the ones which set the line separately, usually were found in the really prepotent individuals, and this is how they were able to establish type. Studies as to a dog's prepotency has proven that some of our top sires were the result of outcross breeding, but an outcross only on paper, as these dogs were generally the product of type-to-type breeding. Well, the majority of the successful stud dogs may have been line-bred or inbred. You can look at a pedigree of another dog where the ancestors don't look alike. But if you sat down and made up a genetic pedigree, and you looked at the intensification of the important characteristics, you would find it strong in both families. Because the pedigree matched up this way, we say it was genetic line breeding, but phenotypically an outcross. The other way around. Phenotypically line bred, genotypical outcross. Successful handling of a stud dog can add revenue to the kennel, but you will also earn every cent that you get. And in order for a dog to become a successful stud dog, it's going to require several prerequisites on the owner's part. This is, of course, assuming that what you have is a top quality animal, with the possibility of producing progeny which excel. These things would include a very successful campaign on the dog's part. If you want a stud dog to become important, people have to take notice of him. Therefore, he should always be shown in the best possible condition. Probably one of the greatest mistakes people make with young males. Showing them too soon, showing them when they're not really ready, showing them when they're not in their prime. You must show them to best advantage at the right time. Timing is probably a key factor in successful winning. And timing can be dealt around the judges, the time of year, the coat factor, the conditioning, and everything else. It is probably one of the main reasons why, as an exhibitor, and as far as the show ring concerned, so many people fail. Knowing your own capabilities, doing this individually, showing the dog to best advantage and putting him on public notice is important. Being honest with yourself in this particular aspect is likewise important. Can you do the best job with this dog? Do you know when he is in optimum condition? Can you put him together the way some of the bigger breeders or important handlers do it? If the answer is an unequivocal no, then seek help. Get someone else to do it. The most important thing is not your ego as a handler or a promoter, but in getting the dog out there looking good so people will at least begin to take notice. Another aspect is good, honest advertising, using good pictures of the dog, and doing so in the right places at the right time. I'm often amazed to see some stud dogs across the country in the flesh, having looked at ugly pictures of them throughout the year, making you think I would never want to breed to them because the pictures are so poor, and yet the animals themselves are quite beautiful. You also will need certain facilities to accommodate a few visiting bitches comfortably. These sound like very easy steps, and yet only a few people really put a lot of forethought into the three areas, and generally wind up with nice dogs who attract very little attention. In years gone by, when kennels were large, breeders would have the opportunity to do progeny testing right within the confines of the kennel. The old cliche, the proof is in the puppies, is certainly one used concerning stud dogs. The proof of ability of a stud is in the caliber of the offspring he produces. Take, for example, Mrs. Ilch of Belhaven, a kennel which produced 133 American champions. Often, she imported some of the best stock that she could find in England, Ireland, and Scotland. And this was during the 1920s and 30s, when the truly American Collie had really not been completely locked in. When the dogs came to Belhaven, they had the opportunity to breed several of the best bitches in the kennel. And during their first year at stud at Belhaven, the majority of the champion bitches were all sent to the new import. Mrs. Ilch and Mike Kennedy, the kennel manager, had thereby done their progeny testing. And by the end of the first year, having watched the puppies grow up, they had a pretty good idea of how prepotent a particular stud dog could be. Belhaven was a kennel which bought from several different lines, several different countries. So they had a majority of bitches, all different family types. Certainly by using this variety of different bitches and sending them to one particular stud for the year would give them a good indication. But few of us today can accommodate 125 dogs as Belhaven did. Or can we afford Mike Kennedy to come live and take care of it all? So the progeny testing is not always done within the kennel, but sometimes done through the use of collective breeding, which George referred to, where several people get together working within a family. The other way that you do it is to take a look at puppies that your dog sires should outside bitches come in. When a kennel desires to acquire a top stud dog, it is important that they look for an individual who can complement their really top bitches, not only to improve their poor ones. And this is a really important factor, a dog that can cross-fault and cross-complement. If you have a kennel of really poor bitches, let's say they all have light eyes or poor structure, poor ears, it wouldn't take much of a stud dog to show you some improvement. What you want to do is get better bitches and find a cross-complement sire. A young dog starting out, bred to several poor bitches, will always show a rise in quality. It's the dogs who get bred to the bitches that win the national that really have to work hard to find out just how good a sire they are. There are certain qualities which I personally feel, and again, this is personal, that I feel all good stud dogs should have. And for the most part, maybe not completely, I do believe almost all of the great ones have. The first is temperament. A good, outgoing nature is a definite necessity for a good stud dog. I think a lot of people today confuse the idea of showmanship and temperament as of one. They're separate entities, because a dog can get up and show does not mean that he always has a good temperament or that he's smart. My best showmen were some of the dumbest dogs I had in the kennel. They were great eaters. Some dogs I have seen who show really well can also be a little bit spooky. These are not going to make great stud dogs. Think about the dog in terms of temperament on just how he is when you go out to poop that run or throw him on the table. See how he acts with you, see how he acts with strangers. And that's all going to play an important role. Some people also think that by good outgoing temperament I mean extremely aggressive. And that is no better. I also believe that good stud dogs must be and come from good doers, and I cannot stress this enough. I've gone the gamut of all the other ones. And the things that I tell you now are personal, things that I feel are important, and most of them come from a lot of failure. And I always feel like every failure I make is just the next step towards my next success. You can certainly learn more from failure than you can from success. Finicky eaters, dogs who are hard to condition, dogs who are hard to kennel, who run off their weight, who fence run, who bark, in general, drive me crazy. All right? But when it comes to stud dogs, I can deal with the fence runners if I had to. But I can't deal with the finicky eaters, and I can't deal with the ones who run their weight off all the time. It's difficult enough just to keep the average poor doer in good condition. But add to that the stress of breeding bitches, constantly being around them and not eating. And you have a dog who will never really stay in good condition. Physical attributes. First, I believe correct balance to be the major prerequisite of a good stud dog. I not only mean balance of overall body style and structure, but complete balance throughout the entire dog. Balance of head, the balance of the legs to the body. You know, years ago, maybe 15, 16 years ago, it was a big thing to have tremendous length of head. People got into this thing where they get the old shoe measures, things they used to measure your foot with to decide what shoe size, and they were out measuring heads. The longer the head, supposedly the better. But a 25-inch head on a short-bodied dog is going to look a little ridiculous. So it's got to be complete balance throughout. A dog who is too long in foreface or too short skull is an extreme. A dog who is way too long in back or too tall on leg is an extreme. A dog with a long neck that sits upright between the shoulder blades is an extreme. Stay away from them, because they're only coming back to haunt you. While we hear often of dogs being too long in back or too tall on leg, the reverse can be true as well. Our standard calls for a dog who is slightly longer than high. And yet I hear so many people saying that they're breeding for Cobby Collies. A shorter back, meaning shorter, not shortest, is one thing. Cobby, read the standard and look at it. I'm not so sure that that's what we want. Fads and trends will always be with us. And though certain fads become fashionable for a while, they often die out as quickly as they come. Generally, the fads revolve around the extremes. I have watched certain fads come and go in my time spent in collies. And again, went through the long head. Before that, there was a period when, I would say probably in the 20s or 30s, collies had basically a two-piece head with muzzle and skull, and there was not a good, clean, flat bone going back. But the dogs that seemed to have that were the Roman-nosed collies. And it became okay to use them if you could get the nice round muzzle. And they definitely got improvement in that particular area. But when you're dealing with extremes, suddenly the profile started to go. Those are the kind of things I mean by extremes, or fads, or trends. Another fad that came up was exaggerated length of head. You know, when you're going for a long head, you start losing the balance as well. And you'll start seeing longer forefaces. And for a while, length of head was really important, but then that fad, because of going to an extreme, is followed by another one. Because we then saw a push for the big, round muzzles. Some refer to them as the great stovepipe muzzles. But some breeders got carried away and bred for drainpipe muzzles, this big. Then came the fad for the long arch necks, which brought them U-necks, straighter shoulders, upright shoulders, short upper arms. Followed by nice short hocks. That was another big one. Nice short hocks, well-bent stifles. What we wound up with after that were overbent stifles with short hocks that move like they have a load in their pants. So you cannot go too far to the extreme. Keep it in perspective, keep it in balance. Balance of the dog, balance of the body parts, and keep your eye balanced to see that you are not looking for extremes. Today we have instant everything. We're going through the fad of hurrying up and getting them done, trying to get them all finished by the time they're 10 or 11 months old. People are out there rushing and rushing, trying to get these dogs out before they're mature. It's important to remember, each family develops differently. There are some families who come out with beautiful puppy flyers, in beautiful condition and beautiful coat. The skulls are flat and the muzzles are filled. And the puppies create an eye-filling picture. But this is definitely within certain families. There are other families who are not so quickly to mature. They don't have the coat. They don't have the skull. And so these people take out these dogs with receding skulls and not enough coat or body. And when they don't win, they're pissed off. This one comes out and wins a show. Her puppy's 10 months old, mine's 11. I don't understand that. Hers is finished. I haven't gotten a point. It's not ready. If you want to push a puppy, look at it and make sure that you know that that puppy can compete with the older dogs. Because puppy flyers are in fashion doesn't mean that every puppy that walks out of a kennel is capable of winning. It used to be more so that dogs were shown at the age of 3. You know, there was a period when I first started, everybody left the dogs home until they were 3 years old, and that was called prime, when dogs were in their prime. And there's going to be an ongoing argument over puppy flyers, should they win, or too many puppies winning. And there aren't really any answers to it. There is nothing, to me, more beautiful than seeing an eye-filling picture of a dog in prime condition. Unfortunately, for many of the shows, the dogs shown in the open classes at the age of 3 are usually the puppies that didn't hold up well, or other dogs who aren't conditioned well, or other dogs who shouldn't be out at all. And they can't possibly stack up against the mature-looking, stylish, pretty puppy. So we have an ongoing battle there. It's a matter of balancing the whole thing out, knowing the difference. I think we're also moving to a trend where we're going to another extreme, and that deals with the eyes. You know, small, dark eyes, small, dark eyes, smaller, darker eyes, smaller, smaller, darker eyes, smaller, 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 darker eyes. To the point where we're starting to see little tiny round eyes stuck in the sides of the skull. There's no chiseling in front of the eyes. You get too much stop between the eyes, and because they are small and dark, that does not make a pretty expression, nor is it what the standard calls for. There's a certain amount of leeway in the standard that lets us fluctuate for the size and shape of the eye. And then we hear people talk about the look of eagles. Bobby's got these great pictures of it. Did you ever look at an eagle? But then we get the other dogs where the eyes are so small that there just is no expression. They're dark. Some of them are well shaped. But it's a combination. Expression is a combination of the color, the size, the shape, the placement, and the chiseling of the eye. Take any one of those to the extreme and you lose the balance. You lose the balance of the eye to the head, the placement to the structure. And again, you'll start going in extremes. But after looking through history, we're always going to go through these extremes and we're always going to go through these fads. But you will find that the kennels with the big successful stud dogs rarely get tied up in the extremes. They keep a constant balance of their stud dogs. And they keep it steady and they try to stay away from any of the extremes. In any case, a good stud dog is rarely one which emerges from the fads, but is a good overall, well-balanced dog. Studying the great sires of the past, there were also certain head qualities which became evident in all of them, from the beginning of time right on through. There were a few exceptions here and there, but like everything else in dogs, you have to deal in generalities. Among these things that all of the great ones seemed to have was a well-rounded muzzle, clean head planks along the sides of the head, and I also believe that a lot of these same virtues are true today as they were years ago. These were not the type heads which were overdone. Some appeared to be beautiful at a young age, some did not, that matured into beauty, but they never coarsened. They continued to improve with age, and the dogs seemed to move in a move towards perfection as they got older. Coupled with this head type came dogs which possessed good bone and substance, which were overdone. There were very few of them who were light-boned, but likewise there were very few of them who were overdone. Aside from these common denominators, a good stud dog is possessed of some hard-to-get virtues and proves to be a prepotent sire of same. Likewise, stud dogs, great sires, have faults. But there is one fault that no great stud dog ever had. They were never common. And my own interpretation of common is a dog who lacks type. I've heard people say that they have dogs who don't have any faults. But they have one fault. They're ugly. And it only takes that one fault to lose it all. Whenever the subject of stud dog arises, another question that goes along with it is, are all great stud dogs champions? My answer is no, but the majority are. There are a few exceptions, but they are just that, exceptions. And there are generally good reasons that they were not champions. Some come to mind immediately. Giuliano's Bellbrook's Master Pilot was never campaigned. The dog was used only 8 times. But he had 2 puppies from 2 of those 8 litters that were pretty important. The first, of course, was George Horne's champion Ginger Bellbrook's Choice, sire of over 30 champions, and during his time, the leading sire of the day. Another was Rivette's Wayside Traveler, who happened to be Adam of Bellbrook's Choice daughter bred back to Pilot, who produced a CCFA winner and 5 other champions. You can look to the sire source for the Gaylord Bramwin line, Bramwin Tomfoolery, the first of the great sires there, lost an ear and was never campaigned to finish his championship. And ironically, the last of the Gaylord Bramwin sires was Bramwin New Legacy, another tricolor who also lost part of an ear, was never campaigned. But each of these dogs went on to become great sires. But for the most part, they're the exceptions. Once a well-bred quality animal has been selected as a stud prospect, his care and maintenance will play a vital role in his development. And during his growth stages, it is absolutely imperative that the owner constantly be observant in his growth pattern, constantly making notes of the various stages of development that this dog goes through. If you're buying a male puppy that you have intentions of using as stud, any information you can get on the growth patterns of his mother and father or his litter mates would also be important to you. You take the information and you store it away. And as his first few litters hit the ground, and you begin to get into a quandary as to what's okay as far as a growth stage goes, you can use some of this information to try and level things out for you. It's important to watch the puppy stages of his first litters. And I don't mean watch until they're 8 weeks old, all the way through, so that you have a good handle on exactly what's happening. A good diet, high in protein, regular parasite checks, semi-annual brucellosis checks, and plenty of exercise are a must. And these things get told year after year. I used to hear them when I used to come to Oconius as a kid, and I'd write them down. Good exercise, parasite check. And every year I'd come out and I'd say, oh yeah, here comes another stud over and tell me the same old crap. until I really got involved in stud dogs, and it sounds so simple, but it's so important. Exercise, I cannot tell you how important I think it is. The first 6 champions raised at Tartanside were whelped and partially raised in a row house in the middle of New York City. It was difficult. It was a lot of my time spent at the 2 local parks with the dogs, and I had to do some form of obedience training so I could turn them loose. The young dogs never had the coat that, the dogs do once I moved out of the area. But several things came into play, and several things that I learned from being so restricted in room. To the point now where, once I get upwards of 20 dogs, it's way too many, just because I've never been used to looking at it. So many people feel that when they grow up in dogs, they cannot wait to have that cinder block building with those 16-foot runs, 4-foot wide, chain link pens, a compound, with a little sign that says, "My Kennel," a little pathway, maybe a little flower box on each side. That's great. Kennel runs are easy, especially if you can afford flap doors and guillotine doors. I couldn't wait. It took me 15 years before I had enough money, time, and space to do it. And so I had my little kennel building with my little individual chain link runs, 16-foot long, 4-foot wide. Number 1, it was difficult conditioning the dogs. Number 2, the dogs started to learn how to fence run. And number 3, I never really quite got a dog in the condition that I call lean and hard. I have always found it imperative that no matter how many runs you have a large, large exercise area. The kind of exercise that a dog gets when he gets running on an even keel around the ring, around the yard or the pen, would be better. There have been kennels in the past where there have been fertility problems, and I know Barbara had a vet speaker, was at Aconia several years ago. Was that Harvey? Yeah. Worked with a Doberman kennel, I believe. Had tremendous fertility problems. And he went in with suggestions and everything else. They tore out all the runs and put in paddocks and put the dogs in groups and let them run. And after 6 months, they once again had a fertile kennel. Many people feel that a stud dog should be king of the mountain. That he should be be an alpha male, put in with a couple of dogs that he can sort of beat on. Personal. I usually keep 3 or 4 stud dogs at a time and several young ones growing out. I always run them together. I run all the dogs together. Each one has an individual. I usually keep 2 in a pen, but then several hours a day, all the stud dogs are turned out together from the time they are young. If we get a new one in at the age of 2, no, I don't throw them out there to let the other ones eat them up. It takes a little bit of time, but I do believe in establishing a pecking order. Sometimes I have to stand out there with a hose and a 2x4 for the initial introductions. But eventually they get to know who's allowed where, who can pull on who can jump on who, and who's going to kill if you get too close. But for the most part, they run together, and they get good, solid exercise. And it wasn't until I started doing this that I finally understood what lean and hard means. When dogs play together and run together, it's not the same exercise that they get in a kennel run. The kennel runs are nice when you're at work. That's basically what I use them for. When I'm out for the day, they're in kennel runs with indoor-outdoor access. But as soon as time permits, they go out to run. I like to use a male at about 10 to 11 months for the first time. And then I like to give him a little bit of break before the next bitch comes in. Why I use this procedure, I cannot tell you, except that it always works for me. I always try to start males off on a proven bitch who will stand and be patient. And they're getting to be fewer and fewer of those. There's a lot of things I've been noticing in the past year, simple things that we don't pay a lot of attention to. I find fewer and fewer bitches coming in without some form of a minor obstruction. I find very few, and I'm curious with Ben and Joyce and people that have worked with the stud dogs, I find very few that really come in. I'll get them to flag, but hardly any of them ripple up their backs anymore. I could always tell when a bitch was ready because you'd see these little waves of the skin over their back. And very few of them really come in and ripple up their back anymore. Usually older bitches that have had a couple of litters, but there's fewer and fewer of those. And it may mean nothing, but just from observation, it kind of makes you think. I always muzzle and tie the bitch. I've had great luck now. They have these comfort muzzles, and I meant to bring one with me made with the Velcro straps that go around the muzzle. We used to do them with stockings. We used to tie them up with the lead. Sheltie people told me take an old dark sock and put it over their head. But I'm afraid if I used one of mine, they'd never get up. I never let a male breed a bitch at any time without my assistance, no matter how easy I think it could be. Hurts my ego. No. Routines are very, very important. Once you let a dog do it on his own, it's hard to get him back. If you have a dog come in the room and he's slow getting started and everything else, Ben was telling me he had one come in the other night and brought the bitch, and the dog looked at him as if to say, hey, I'm not in the mood, why don't you try? If you let him fart around too long, if you let him pee all over the house, you are beginning to set up routines. If you let him jump the bitch the wrong way, and you continually let him do it, if you let him do it without assistance, you have established a pattern. And every time that they come in, they're going to keep testing you and try this pattern out. Now you might want to take a 22 and put it between this dog's eyes. And you might want to call him some of the foulest names that you can think of. But you've got this bitch with a tail flagging that's got to be bred. And so you sweet talk them and you mollycoddle them and you promise them anything if they will just get up and breed this GD bitch. You have to be somewhat of an actor to have a stud dog. Or a salesman. I would imagine the people that sell real estate would make great stud owners. You know, they smile all the time and they're so happy, you know, and when this dog's not getting up on the bitch, come on, get up here. When you'd really like to take his two ears and permanently keep them over or remove them from his head. Patience, the greatest virtue of all. Routines, as I said, are important. I follow a few very hard, fast rules, and I never change them. One, I never let my males see the bitches until the time that I deem a bitch is ready. Generally, bitches are bred from 12 days on, unless I know of something positive telling me that they will be ready earlier. Though a vaginal smear will show that the bitch is ovulating on her 10th or 11th day, with collies, and I don't find it with Shelties, which I've also bred, I do not believe that a collie bitch is in standing heat until 24 to 48 hours after the onset of ovulation. In general, this is usually anywhere from the end of the 11th day on. I have had the best success rate, I've kept the records and validated it, of bitches bred between 12 and 14 days. There are some that miss and come back and we breed them earlier. Some take from an earlier breeding. I've had them breed as late as 24 days. I had one bitch come in years ago that we bred in the same week. One bitch owner knew about her bitches, and she told me, my bitch just came in season today, I have to bring her tomorrow. I thought she was out of her mind, and I think you also bred her. Les, it was one of Doris Wardeman's bitches. And I think Les had Blackhawk at the time and figured out when she was ready that it was second day. She later came to be bred at my house, and she took both times, second day. But I think she had missed 2 or 3 times before that, because they had bred her 10 or 12 days. 2 days later, someone else called and said they had a bitch in season. I told them to bring it over on the 12th day. Couldn't breed her. Tried her on the 13th day, couldn't breed her. Tried her on the 14th day, did an artificial insemination. Tried her on the 16th day, and I just sort of let the dog rape her, I guess, because I figured she was running out of time. On her 24th day, she flagged her tail and rippled her back, and the girl called me up and said, would you mind if I brought her? And we tried. Sure enough, up and in 8 puppies. Definitely from the very last breeding. But they're the exceptions. It can happen. Now, if you want to play with exceptions, that's fine. Tell the people, all right, bring the bitch on her first day and I'll just watch her for the next 24 days to make sure I've got it at the right time. If you've got the time in the facilities, good for you. But for the most part, you have to deal with generalities. I always tell people, watch them. If you're not sure, do some kind of a smear. Call me if you think there's a problem. Of all the calls that I've had and all the bitches that came in because they felt they were making a mistake and ran them over early, I'd say 90% of the time they were wrong. We bred them between 12 and 14 days. I always, another hard fast rule, always dilate a bitch using a sterile finger cut and KY jelly, Vaseline, whatever you want to use. Insert the cut, put on the lubricant, and put your finger in to dilate the bitch. After you have placed your finger in there and you get in past the vulva, you've got to make sure that there are no areas of polyps, extra folds of skin, or anything like that that is going to become an impossibility for the dog to penetrate the bitch. Most of them are not impossible. They're just a pain in the ass. It means you have to figure out how to get the dog past the obstructions and into the bitch, far enough in so that the bulbus blandus gets in and the sphincter muscles constrict and create a tie. I'll go into that in a minute. As you penetrate the bitch with your finger, if you haven't done it before and you're new to a stud dog, you'll feel the bitch's sphincter muscles tighten around your finger. These are the same muscles which help a tie occur, as the pressure causes the bulbus blandus to swell. The vaginal tract on all bitches will vary. And I'm going to put this on at the end because I have a couple of things I'd like to show you. Alright, so my first rule, hard rule of thumb, was that I never let a male see the bitch until the time that I deem they're ready. That's after I dilate them, check them out, sometimes even bathe them and deflea them if necessary. Secondly, I always breed bitches in the same place. For me, it's a small room in the basement, allowing no distractions for the male. I use the same little piece of carpet all the time. And the males know that the only time they go in this room is to breed the bitches. 3, I try to do all my breedings at the same time as much as possible. And for me, that's generally sometimes in the early evening. Sometimes when it gets to the summer and it's too hot, although we do use air-conditioned quarters when we're doing a breeding. But sometimes the males have just not done anything all day but laid around because of the heat. Some cases like that I'll wait till early in the morning. But for the most part, I try to do them always at the same time. I always use carpeting because I think it's important to good footing. And this type of carpeting or color carpeting is only used for breedings. Because I used to use them for crate mats. And as soon as some of the dogs would see these little pieces of carpeting, they were running around lifting their leg all over trying to find the bitch. Alright, dogs. Both dogs and bitches are not fed for 2 hours prior or 2 hours after breeding. 6, I never let bitch owners watch the breeding. The less distraction, the better. And males will work better with the same people around all the time. Most of the time, bitches behave better when the owners aren't there as well. If the people are at the house and they want to witness the tie, as soon as I've got them tied, I send somebody up if you want to see 2 dogs stuck together. Hiney to hiney, be my guest. But it's better if they are not in the room. The less distractions, the more you follow the routine, the better off you're going to be. Okay? Where did I get all this information, and do I think this is important and everything else? My vet told me a story once, and I keep coming back to it. She told me that they had done these tremendous studies of cancer patients. And whether it was renal cancer or breast cancer or anything else, they did find a common denominator. All these people use toilet paper. Okay? That was the one denominator, and you're going to find it with dogs and everything else. Why do you do things? I don't know. seems to work that way, and this is the way it goes. You can try and find solutions to problems and everything else. Sometimes the solutions are ridiculous. So you look for a common denominator and think, well, they all did this or fed that or whatever. May mean nothing. But if it works, do it. Okay, just a few things on the clinical side, and I'm going to come down and use the overhead. I really believe it's important that a complete understanding of both male and female reproductive organs is going to be of great use to people with studs. And I'm going to put these in an odd area of this because the projector is kind of off angle. Alright, this diagram shows you the basic parts of the male anatomy, which stud dog owners should familiarize themselves with. The testicles themselves, alright, are actually what produce the sperm, as well as a small quantity of fluid that makes up the semen or the ejaculate. The remainder of the ejaculate is produced by the prostate gland. Up in here, I don't know how clear that is. It's produced by the prostate gland. In doing a physical examination of the male dog, when you're checking him out to make sure that he's fertile and everything else, one of the most important things to do is to palpate the testicles. That means you go down and reach under and you feel the testicles. They are basically oval in shape, but as you palpate them, you will notice a slight protrusion at one end. Okay, and if you look at it, the testicle will look more like this. That slight protrusion is called the epididymis. The head of the epididymis is located over in here. And if you follow along the body, you'll see how the shape tends to vary. At the caudal pole, which is right in here, the tail of the epididymis has to proceed in the same direction, coming straight back. If it leans to a side or leans too much under, you'll notice that there will be problems. It should never lean over in the direction of the spermatic cord. The general occupation of the epididymis is to take the sperm from the testicle out into the penis, and finally through the sheath, and eventually into the bitch. However, the most specific function of the epididymis is that this is the place where sperm is stored to be matured. If the sperm does not sit in a functioning epididymis, it will not be mature enough to cause fertilization. Sperm enters through the head of the epididymis, and it moves down through the body, and it's stored in the tail until it's ready for use. It takes approximately 15 days to complete this cycle. Sperm which does not pass through the epididymis cannot fertilize a bitch. So if you have a testicle with a non-functioning epididymis, and that sperm does not become mature, you're not going to get any puppies. The storage of sperm in the tail is an important function within itself. For though we may collect billions of sperm in the ejaculate, many more have been reabsorbed or died on the way out. So although billions and billions are produced, not all of them make it to their destination. Okay, we'll come back to this for a minute. In essence, the testes serve two functions. First, to produce the sperm, and second, to secrete the male hormone testosterone, which brings about and maintains the adult functioning of the male apparatus and secondary sexual characteristics of the dog. Testosterone is what is necessary to stimulate sexual desire in the male. I beg your pardon? Well, it was better than the Greek revival lesson I did today. All right. The prostate gland of the dog surrounds the neck and the bladder at the beginning of the urethra. When you notice a male dog having difficulty urinating, there's usually some form of inflammation and swelling in the prostate. And this is why all these things seem to interconnect and can cause you problems. The penis consists essentially of the urethra and two separately designed muscles, which include spongy tissue. That becomes engorged with blood during the sexual excitement. This is the action which causes the penis to swell and become erect. Once that penis has become erect and enters the bitch, and the bitch's sphincter muscles begin to bear down on it, you create a tie. There is a second bone in the penis known as the os penis. Is that clear at all? It's like it's lopsided. All right, there is a bone located in the dog's penis known as the os penis, which is located at the base and has a large tissue known as the glans penis. It is this combination which allows the dog to tie the bitch. And you'll see all of this moving out where the arrows are, show you where the constrictor muscles would come in and add to the actual tie. All right, let's take a quick look at the anatomy of the bitch. All right. Inside, once you get in past the vulva, inside the vagina, you'll see where the bitch's sphincter muscles, and I'm going to bring this one up a little bit closer. Inside the vagina are the bitch's sphincter or constrictor muscles. During the actual breeding, the male's penis enters the bitch through the vagina. At this point, the bulbus glandis begins to swell. All right, it's stimulating and dilating the bitch, much the same way that your finger did when you first went through the bitch to check her out. Following this dilation, the sphincter muscles contract and they put pressure behind the bulbus glandis. This, again, causes the swelling and causes the tie. In normal ejaculation, a male emits a clear fluid within the first 30 seconds. Most of this is simply prostate fluid. It's usually from anywhere from, say, 1 to 3 cc's. This is followed by the sperm rich, and this fraction is usually, say, 1 to 4 cc's. The final fraction is prostratic secretion, and the amount varies depending upon the size of the dog. The actual sperm rich is what's going to do the fertilizing. It's basically opaque in color and very thick. And the actual time of the ejaculation of this fluid varies from 1 to 4 minutes. When I talk to various breeders who have dealt with artificial insemination, it just amazes me that some will come up and say, "Oh yeah, man, we got like 40 cc's out of this dog, 40 cc's of sperm." And someone else is all upset because they only got 6 or 8. Actually, all I got probably of the sperm rich was maybe 4. The rest is prostatic fluid. Some dogs will give you more than others. I've known some breeders also who do sperm checks on their own. They breed the bitch. As soon as the tie breaks, they run and they get a glass slide, and they take it and they push it up the bitch's vulva. And they get a little bit of staining on there, and they put it under the microscope. And then you usually hear, there's a gasp. Because what they see under the microscope is not good. There's not much moving. Hopefully all the good stuff is already in the bitch. What's coming back on a backwash is just some of the prostatic fluid. Figure you've been tied for about 15, 20 minutes. Sperm is not healthy to live that long, so it's definitely dead. That is not the way to do the sperm count. Fertilization in itself is the uniting of the sperm and the ovum, sperm and the egg. The sperm is much smaller than the ovum. And this is one of the things that you have to realize on why you need so many sperm. This is an ovum. And what you see around the outside is called a sperm swarm. And you'll see Mark Spitz in there and all those little swimmers around the outside. Usually around any ovum are thousands and thousands of sperm. But only one is permitted to enter. What happens is all of these sperm go all around the outside of the ovum and they begin secreting an enzyme. That begins to weaken the ovum wall. And as more come and more enzyme is emitted, the wall will weaken just enough to let one enter and fertilize it. The rest of them usually die of exhaustion. They've done their work. And at the same time, if you only have a few, you're not going to get the cell wall weakened enough to allow the penetration of one of the sperm to fertilize the ovum. So you do need lots of strong sperm on the outside to have fertilization occur. Once the sperm has gained entrance to the ovum, the cell wall closes back up and it's made thicker and impervious to any of the other sperm that hang around. Then the ovum casts off half the chromosomes and the nucleus of the sperm begins to grow from the nourishment it finds in the body of the ovum. When it is grown to a size equal to that of the nucleus, the two join. Each has half the prerequisite number of chromosomes, and thus we have all these things uniting. A new life has been created, and hopefully the next CCOA winner is sitting within that little ovum. I'm going to come back up for a minute. Okay, some common problems with breeding. Having helped many people either break in stud dogs or try to help with problem bitches, I think one of the biggest problems that people do not understand again is how the cycles run on the bitch. And again, I keep saying about this 12 to 14 day. For those not experienced, you start with proestrus. This is generally the first 9 or 10 days. It's noticed by the onset of discharge and swelling of the vulva. The vulva becomes large, turgid, and a key word, firm. It's hard, especially up at the top. We then move into the actual estrus. Generally, this is the period that the bitch will accept the male and generally last 5 to 6 days. If you don't get the bitch bred on the 11th day, or the 12th day, or even the 13th day, you can still have puppies. They are breedable 5 or 6 days. Some are breedable for 10 days. I do believe, again, 12 to 14 would be my guess at the optimum time. You will find if you look at 10 days or 11 days that the vulva is enlarged, but not necessarily soft. And that's important. When you do the dilation, it must be enlarged but soft. And again, you have the exceptions. I've had bitches come in that never really swell. And I've had lots of bitches come in that discharge, but it doesn't have any color. Silent heats are a real drag because you can't rely on the color changes. So you rely on the slides if you have to. I rely on the dilation techniques. You can pretty much tell when the bitch is ready as you dilate them. From the actual estrus period, you go into diestrus. The period following estrus when bitches' reproductive organs are under the primary influence of progesterone. You wind up ending with the actual time of whelping. Few personal thoughts as a stud owner. Timeliness is one of the greatest attributes of any great sire. The great sires have always been the dogs who have the needed virtues of the breed at a given time. This is what makes a sire in great demand. This is why one dog becomes a great sire. As an example, Silver Hope Parader. Here was a dog noted for his bold, outgoing temperament. In a period when the majority of collies were extremely introverted and extremely shy. His puppies proved his prepotency in this area, that he could produce puppies who were outgoing and aggressive in nature. The fact that they had nice, sound, deep bodies and pretty expressions were the icing on the cake. But the thing that drew people to the dog initially was the temperament. Because several people went, people began to take notice of the puppy for their temperaments, and they began to notice the common denominators of the other qualities which the dog was producing. It was necessary, and it was timely. Likewise, these dogs also produced faults. And I always say that the next great stud dog is usually the one who cleans up his predecessor's mess. Because along with all those virtues, you're going to get faults. If you don't want to get those faults, don't breed to the top winners. Go get your faults from the dog down the street. But most times when you breed to one of the dogs who is established, you will know where the virtues are and where the faults are. They put out more puppies than the non-popular stud dogs. Why? You figure it out. Obviously, there's something needed. Obviously, people are using them for a reason. And if you don't think the people breeding to them are aware of their faults, ask a couple of people in your club. They'd be more than happy to tell you of all the faults of the great stud dogs. When selecting a stud dog to use in your breeding program, pedigree becomes important. When you have a stud dog inbred on all the same dogs as the other bitches in your kennel, this allows for some tight inbreeding, which can be good. But you're going to quickly, very quickly, have to find the judicious outcross where you become too tight and you have no place to go. The biggest downfall of some kennels is the fact that they get so inbred and the outcrosses aren't out there that they need at a particular time. Every time I want to make an outcross, I always think, why did that dog die 10 years ago? You know, all the outcross dogs are never there when I want them. You can work within the family and keep coming up with it. As you begin to line breed or inbreed, you begin to create continuity and consistency. The dogs continue to look alike. So inbreeding on a dog and inbreeding within a particular family begins to set characteristics and type. What happens to some people, though, is the breeding program also becomes stagnant. With just continued line breeding or continued inbreeding, never looking for an outcross, all you are doing is making more of the same. And at points like this, we see many good dogs. But the emergence of any of the great ones is not coming. But it can. And you can find it when you go out looking for an outcross now and then. You line breed or inbreed to set and fix type. But if you need something new in the program and it's not available in your line, the only way you're going to pick it up is through an outcross. Promotion of a stud is best done through his offspring, and finding the correct mates for your dog's stud is another way of going about it. If your stud dog is very closely related to all the bitches in the kennel, how many breedings can you do? How many different combinations can you make until things are too close? And also remember that as you're breeding that tightly within the kennel, and you're breeding within the same family, you are also setting the faults. So likewise, that's important. And you'll know they're there, and sometimes you'll make those combinations. But if you lose sight of the fact that they're there, then you need Dr. Donovan to check you, not for PRA, but for kennel blindness. One and the same. In my own kennel, I do not keep a lot of dogs. The biggest noted sire would have been Champion Tartanside the Gladiator. From him, we carried on with 3 sons, heir apparent, or with 1 son rather, heir apparent, and then 3 of his sons. Gladiator himself was closely line bred. 3 of his best daughters were bred back to him, all producing champions. One of these daughters was Revette's Tar and Feather. She happened to be one of my personal favorites. Bred back to him, that was the breeding which produced heir apparent. I wanted to establish a tail line stemming down through him, so it was also important to bring in new blood. I also had to work my way out of a PRA problem and find the non-carriers, so my selection was not quite as widespread as it could have been had we not run into the eye problem. With heir apparent, I then had an inbred son, and I wanted to bring in some new things, but I was really on to the type-to-type breeding. So I looked for a bitch who I felt would cross-complement and cross-fault the dog. I then purchased Champion Tartanside Fairwind Fantasy. Totally non-related bitch in pedigree within the first generations, but nonetheless a bitch who seemed to look like the family. Breeding her to heir apparent produced 8 champions, 2 of them national specialty winners. One of them was apparently, thereby, an outcross. His sire was inbred, but his dam was non-related in the first 4 generations, so you could call him an outcross. As other bitches came in to be bred to heir apparent, I wanted to bring in additional families that would add some other things that I desire. I didn't want to have a large number of dogs. I didn't want to have a large number of bitches. And I wanted to be able to cross back and forth between different stud dogs, playing my virtues. So I began selecting the males from bitches with different pedigrees. I looked for bitches whom I was familiar with the family. The Briar Hill family stemmed down from Gladiator with a very strong cross to Lick Creek's Pizzazz. I liked the coat factor there, and I liked the heavy bone. So I arranged to take a stud fee puppy when Champion Briar Hill's Midnight High was bred to heir apparent. And that puppy was Critic's Choice. She was already the dam of 2 puppies that I liked a lot. Alright, and in the end she wound up being the dam of 5 champions. Then there was Spellbound. His dam was also line bred with a 3rd outcross. This allowed me to have 3 heir apparent sons whose offspring I could sort of play back and forth without getting too tightly inbred. Breeding their offspring back and forth, I felt I could intensify the main source through Gladiator, but I could dilute some of the inbred danger through the outcross dams. I mention this not as a commercial, but just a way of showing another form of carrying on a breeding program without having a large kennel. And those are avenues that we have to seek constantly. If you look to some of the other breeders on the panel, you can find similar situations in stud selection. George Horn's outstanding sire, Bellbrook's Choice, who produced 30 champions, was basically a line-bred dog. But the continuation of the Ginger line would work its way down a few generations to the purchase of an outcross bitch named Champion Carla's Blue Ruin, thereby enabling the Ginger line to grow strong rather than stagnant. They brought in new virtues. Champion Twin Creek's True Grit, the top sire of all time, would carry through by nature of an inbred son through one of his best daughters, and that was Champion Twin Creek's Postscript. An outcross for them using one of their best bitches, Champion Twin Creek's Shady Lady, would give them an outcross male and Champion Twin Creek's Tough Guy. And the continuation of the line, going right back into the line breeding, would keep it strong, but continually adding new virtues in different directions. The big kennels are gone, and like creative financing, we must look for creative breeding plans. If we are going to continue to breed to perfection, if we only breed within the parameters of our own kennel, never going outside, the growth will become self-limiting through too much inbreeding. Another thought on studs. The progeny testing is also progeny understanding. We can't all have a lot of litters, but if we have stud dogs that are used, go out and look at the puppies and study them and evaluate them. Don't poo-poo them if they don't become champions, but learn from them. Stud dogs are not for everyone. Though they can be a source of income, the problem of barking, noisy, nasty bitches becoming a nuisance, not only to you but your neighbors, can become a problem. It's important also that you live close to the airport, for you will find a lot of your time going back and forth down those roads, sometimes in the middle of the night. Do not believe for 1 minute that all bitches arrive when they are supposed to. It's rare. I spent one Christmas Eve being persuaded to pick up a bitch that night who was coming in at 10:30 Christmas night, and I sat at the airport until 10 o'clock the next morning waiting for her to arrive because they kept telling me she'll be on the next flight. And after the first 6 flights, she finally came in. Just one quick thing, because Murray's giving me the high sign to bag it. If you run into infertility problems, I did an article in the review for this, there is nothing more disheartening, more frightening than problems with infertility. And the reason it's so frightening is because basically the vets don't always know a whole hell of a lot more than we do. In trying to solve any fertility problems, be it bitches or dogs, you need to have a good, competent veterinarian, and you need to have the help and assistance of as many breeders as you can find. Neither one has all the answers. It's got to be a combination of the information walking down. With male dogs, when you run into problems, find a competent vet who has worked with reproductive problems. Go through all the simple things first, like feeding. Have you changed feed? Have you been really giving the dog enough exercise? All right? Do a brucellosis check, and then usually in this order. Next, do a T3, T4, which is thyroid. Next, let the vet do a physical examination, including an examination of the penis, a palpation of the testicles. At the same time, have him do a complete blood count. Next, do the semen collection. From the semen collection, you want to do a couple of things. The vet is going to look at it right away for the color to see that it's thick and opaque looking. They're going to look on the microscope and check it for volume to make sure that there's enough. They're going to look for motility and mobility. They're going to look for certain debris which could indicate bacterial infection. And you will find dogs not used for several months will have a high bacteria level in that. They're going to look at numbers. They look at the number of sperm per field and they calculate it. It's usually done by multiplying the concentration of the total volume. Changes in concentration are not unusual as it depends on the amount of prostate fluid that goes into it. But I will tell you this, having worked with different vets and checked out collies for several years, the normal good count of a collie would look like a sterile beagle in most cases. The first time I had vets look at dogs, I went through the whole thing and something bothered me. So I took 2 males in that I knew were fertile and siring real well. And they started telling me about the problems these dogs had. You know, that the numbers were low and everything else. A collie's count looks lower. I only know it from beagles because my vet works with beagles, bouviers, and collies primarily in the reproductive field. And from doing the reproduction work, there is a big variation. You also want to do a semen culture to check for infection. Now, you can spend lots of time and lots of weeks going to the vet as they try out new things. If you have in mind what you want to have done, and you can get it all done in one visit, you're going to set yourself up with a lot of money. If you think there's a problem, do the brucellosis, T3, T4, and CBC all in one shot, because they can do it from one collection of blood. If they do the semen collection, they'll end up rub some off and put it on a culture and send it out. One last note, do I think cultures on bitches are worthwhile? I don't know. Why I don't know? If you shipped your bitch into me early in her heat, I would take her to my vet, who I would have cultured her using the correct Teebling swab. She would send it to the laboratory she is currently using because the one she had last year did not read them correctly. She said, as a veterinarian, the biggest problem she has is finding a good laboratory. And even if you find a good laboratory, occasionally you get a lousy lab tech. She would like to read them herself if she could. And I feel that the information gleaned from that experience would definitely be worthwhile. But unfortunately, I don't have the room to keep bitches the entire heat. So I rely on the fact that a breeder is using a vet as good as mine, who has a lab as good as hers, who knows how to read the cultures as well as she, but that ain't always the case. Do we not do them? Do we do them? I don't know. But until someone can prove to me that they're not worthwhile, since I've had a couple of things picked up on certain bitches coming in that were real problems, having also had one stud dog who has a real problem with one small aspect which does not render other dogs infertile, but a certain form of a staph infection which elevates his numbers and drops his count immediately. It's something that I always want to be aware of with bitches. And when they come in, we have found tremendous luck with a pig flush called Amaglide, which is mixed with sterile water, and we deuce the bitch once for this particular dog only. For some reason, he has no resistance to Staph aureus. Sounds like I know all this stuff. I only learned it because I ran into problems. And you learn a lot from your failures and your problems. Thank you.